Advent, second, movement of 1844, prophetic study in England and decades preceding. The study of prophecy was of a more vague and general character during the early years of the 19th century. Such books as Faber's dissertation on the Prophecies, published in 1806, were mainly taken up with principles apart from any supposed application of them to contemporaneous events, or to such as were coming immediately. But about the year 1812 the study of prophecy took a more definite shape. In that year a book, which was afterward translated by Mr. Irving, was published by a Spanish Jesuit named Lopenza, under the assumed title of Juan Josaphat ben Ezra, on the second coming of the Messiah in glory and majesty. In this work he argues that the Church had never condemned the true doctrine, as he deemed it, of the millennium, but only the errors by which it had been perverted. In the next year appeared Cunningham's dissertation on the seals and trumpets, in which the period of 1260 years mentioned in the Apocalypse was fixed as extending from the Edict of Justinian, in 533 A.D., to the French Revolution, being the period during which the celebrated Code of Justinian was in force, for the French Revolution became the means of the introduction of the Code of Napoleon, by which the previous code was abrogated. Till that epoch the Code of Justinian remained the basis of ecclesiastical law. In the ensuing year, Mr. Hatley Frere published his combined view of the Christian prophecies. This was a book which acquired a great reputation among those who afterward made up the school of prophecy, which was now in infancy. The History and Doctrines of Irvinism, Edward Miller, M.A., Volume I, pp. 10, 11, London, G. Egg and Paul and Co., 1878. Advent, second, movement of 1844. Church of England clergymen on the year 1844, there appears to be no presumption in the attempt to direct the anxious mind to the chronological periods which God has given, and to inquire how far they support these anticipations. I have done so, as have likewise almost all that have gone before me in these studies, and the results of my inquiries, as they run throughout the whole of this work, and as they appear in the chronological chart in my former work, must, by this time, be familiar to the reader. It will be perceived they all point to a very early period, the year 1844, and although it is fashionable to object to the fixing of dates, yet so long as it is said, things that are revealed belong to us and to our children forever, I see not on what sufficient ground, an historical exposition of the prophecies of the Revelation of St. John, Matthew Haowershon, pp. 285, 286, London, James Nisbet and Co., 1841. Advent, second, movement of 1844, origin of, in America. What is known as the Advent movement originated with William Miller, who was born at Pittsfield, Mass., February 15, 1782, and died in Lohampton, N.Y., December 20, 1849. He bore a good reputation as a farmer and citizen, serving under a captain's commission in the War of 1812, and was a diligent student and a great reader, although he had but a common school education. For some years he was an avowed deist, but, as he said, found no spiritual rest, until in 1816 he was converted and united with the Baptists. At that time very little was heard from pulpit or press respecting the second coming of Christ, the general impression being that it must be preceded by the conversion of the world and the millennium, a long period of universal holiness and peace. As Mr. Miller studied the prophetic portions of the Bible, however, he became convinced that the doctrine of the world's conversion was unscriptural. His conclusion was that the coming of Christ in person, power, and glory must be premillennial. Moreover, as a result of his study of prophetic chronology, he believed not only that the Advent was at hand, but that its date might be fixed with some definiteness. Taking the more or less generally AC2 accepted view that the days of prophecy symbolize years, he was led to the conclusion that the 2,300 days referred to in Daniel 8, 13, 14, the beginning of which he dated from the commandment to restore Jerusalem, given in 457 B.C., Dan. 9, 25, and the 1,335 days of the same prophet, 12, 12, which he took to constitute the latter part of the 2,300 days, would end coincidentally in or about the year 1843. The cleansing of the sanctuary, which was to take place at the close of the 2300 days, Dan. 8:14, he understood to mean the cleansing of the earth at the second coming of Christ, which, as a result of his computations, he confidently expected would occur sometime between March 21, 1843, and March 21, 1844, the period corresponding to the Jewish year. Special Reports, Religious Bodies, 1906 inches Part 2, p. 11, Bureau of the Census, Washington, Government Printing Office, 1910. Advent, Second, Movement of 1844, reached many lands. One or two on every quarter of the globe have proclaimed the news, and agree in the time. Wolfe, of Asia, Irwin, late of England, Mason, of Scotland, Davis, of South Carolina, and quite a number in this region are, or have been, giving the cry. And will not you all, my brethren, examine and see if these things are so, and trim your lamps, and be found ready? Evidence from Scripture and History of the Second Coming of Christ about the year 1843, William Miller, Lecture 16, p. 238, Boston, Joshua V. Himes, 1842, Advent, Second, Movement of 1844, publications sent worldwide. As early as 1842, Second Advent publications had been sent to every missionary station in Europe, Asia, Africa, and America, both sides of the Rocky Mountains. The commanders of our vessels and the sailors tell us that they touch at no port where they find this proclamation has not preceded them, and frequent inquiries respecting it are made of them. Exposition of Matthew 24, E.R. Penny, pp. 8, 9, cited in the Great Second Advent Movement. J.N. Loughborough, p. 105. Washington, D.C., Review and Herald Publishing Association, 1905, Advent, Second, Movement of 1844, Iniant. In 1831 Joseph Wolfe, D.D., was sent as a missionary from Great Britain to labor among the Jews of Palestine. He, according to his journals, down to the year 1845, proclaimed the Lord's speedy advent in Palestine, Egypt, on the shores of the Red Sea, Mesopotamia, the Crimea, Persia, Georgia, throughout the Ottoman Empire, in Greece, Arabia, Turkey, Bukhara, Afghanistan, Kashmir, Hindustan, Tibet, and Holland, Scotland, Ireland, at Constantinople, Jerusalem, St. Helena, also at shipboard in the Mediterranean, and in New York City to all denominations. He declares that he has preached among Jews, Turks, Mohammedans, Parsis, Hindus, Chaldeans, Yezids, Syrians, Sabines, Tupashas, Sheiks, Shahs, the kings of Organch and Bukhara, the Queen of Greece, etc. Voice of the Church p. 343, cited in the Great Second Advent Movement. J.N. Loughborough, p. 101. Advent, Second, Movement of 1844, a worldwide proclamation. An English writer, Mernt Brock, thus remarks, "It is not merely in Great Britain that the expectation of the near return of the Redeemer is entertained, and the voice of warning raised, but also in America, India, and on the continent of Europe. I was lately told by one of our German missionaries that in Württemberg there is a Christian colony of several hundreds, one of the chief features of which is the looking for the second advent. And a Christian minister from near the shores of the Caspian Sea has told me that there is the same daily expectation among his nation. They constantly speak of it as the day of consolation." In a little publication, entitled The Millennium, the writer says that he understands in America about 300 ministers of the word are thus preaching this gospel of the kingdom, while in this country, he adds, about 700 of the Church of England are raising the same cry. Advent Tracts, Volume 2, p. 135, cited in Bible Tracts, Volume 2, The Three Angels, J. N. Andrews, pp. 23, 24, Rochester, N. Y. Advent Review Office, 1855, Advent, Second, Movement of 1844, Numbers of all denominations in America. We have no means of ascertaining the number of ministers, and others, who have embraced the Advent faith. We only know that there are several hundred congregations, and a still larger number of ministers, who have publicly professed the faith, besides many who still remain in the churches of the land. Those who have espoused this cause have honestly believed in the coming of the Lord about A.D. 1843, and, as honest men, they have kept to their work of sounding the alarm. All peculiarities of creed or policy have been lost sight of, in the absorbing inquiry concerning the coming of the heavenly bridegroom. Those who have engaged in this enterprise are from all the various sects in the land: Protestant Episcopal, Methodist Episcopal, Methodist Protestant, Primitive Methodist, Wesleyan Methodist, Close Communion Baptist and Open Communion Baptist, Calvinistic and Arminian Baptists, Presbyterians, Old and New School Congregationalists, Old and New School Lutheran, Dutch Reformed, etc. The Advent Shield and Review, May, 1844, Volume I, p. 90, Boston, Joshua V. Himes, Advent, Second, Movement of 1844, Children Proclaimed Message. In this connection we will notice how the Lord wrought to introduce the proclamation in those countries where the law forbade the preaching of anything contrary to the established church. Sweden was one of those countries. There the Lord used little children to introduce the work. The first of this manifestation was in the summer of 1843, in Exjo, southern Sweden. A little girl, only 5 years of age, who had never learned to read or sing, one day, in a most solemn manner, sang correctly a long Lutheran hymn, and then with great power proclaimed the hour of his judgment is come, and exhorted the family to get ready to meet the Lord, for he was soon coming. The unconverted in the family called upon God for mercy, and found pardon. This movement spread from town to town, other children proclaiming the message. The same movement among children was manifest to some extent in Norway and Germany. In 1896, while holding meetings in 17 different parts of Sweden, I passed through several places where the children had preached in 1843, and had opportunity to converse with those who had heard the preaching, and with men who had preached when they were children. I said to one of them, "You preached the Advent message when you were a boy?" He replied, "Preached." Yes, I had to preach. I had no devising in the matter. A power came upon me, and I uttered what I was compelled by that power to utter. The Great Second Advent Movement, J. N. Loughborough, p. 140, Washington, D.C., Review and Herald Publishing Association, 1905. Advent, Second, Movement of 1844, Experience in Sweden. In the year 1843, a religious movement occurred among the people in Karlskoga Parish, in Örebro. The leaders in this movement were children and young men, who were called repair. These preached with divine power, and proclaimed before the people, with great decision, that the hour of God's judgment had come. In the fall of the same year, I.O. Bokvist, then 15 years of age, with another young man, Eric Walbom, 18 years of A0E, became so influenced by this unseen power that we could in no wise resist it. As soon as we were seized by this heavenly power, we commenced to speak to the people, and to proclaim with loud voice that the judgment hour had come, referring them to Joel 2:28-32 and Revelation 14:6-7. The people congregated in large numbers to listen to us, and our meetings continued both day and night, and a great religious awakening was the result. Young and old were touched by the Spirit of God, and cried to the Lord for mercy, confessing their sins before God and man. But when the priest in the church was apprised of all this, many efforts were put forth to silence us. We were arrested, and on the following day were placed in custody in Örebro prison. Here we were associated with thieves in cell 14, as though we had committed some great crime. Through the sympathy and pleadings of the warden, we were released and permitted to return to our homes. The cruel treatment we had received threw us into a long siege of fever. After a few weeks we were able to resume our preaching, which brought on a fresh outburst of persecution against us. But this time a prominent parishioner presented our case to King Oscar I, and secured freedom for us. 0. Bokvist, in the Advent Review and Sabbath Herald, Battle Creek, Michigan, October 7, 1890, Volume 67, Number 39, p. Advent, Second, Movement of 1844, the cry as the seventh month came. Reader, have you heard this astounding cry, this last midnight cry, which has so suddenly awakened the virgins, who were slumbering and sleeping during the tarrying of the vision? Have you heard it while it has been borne on the wings of the wind to every Advent band in the land, and aroused them simultaneously from their slumbers, electrifying them with its startling appeal? If you have not, then it is high time to awake out of sleep, and listen to its solemn notes. The cry has gone forth, that the Lord, whose goings forth are from everlasting, is to come in judgment this present month. The Midnight Cry, New York, Friday, October 11, 1844, Volume 7, Number 15, p. 113, Note. When the spring of 1844 did not bring the coming of the Lord, the disappointment was keen. Believers found comfort, however, in the idea of the tarrying time in the parable of the 10 virgins waiting for the bridegroom. Some taught that the true ending of the prophetic period marking the cleansing of the sanctuary must be on the 10th day of the 7th month, as in the typical cleansing of the sanctuary. This day fell upon October 22 that year. About July this idea seized upon hearts with a compelling force, revived the believers, and what was called the Midnight Cry began. Et Advent, Second Movement of 1844, the Midnight Cry. At first the definite time was generally opposed, but there seemed to be an irresistible power attending its proclamation, which prostrated all before it. It swept over the land with the velocity of a tornado, and it reached hearts in different and distant places almost simultaneously, and in a manner which can be accounted for only on the supposition that God was in it. It produced everywhere the most deep searching of heart and humiliation of soul before the God of high heaven. It caused a weaning of affections from the things of this world, a healing of controversies and animosities, a confession of wrongs, a breaking down before God, and penitent, broken-hearted supplications to Him for pardon and acceptance. It caused self-abasement and prostration of soul, such as we never before witnessed. The Midnight Cry, New York, Thursday, October 31, 1844, Volume 7, Number 18, p. 140. Advent, Second Movement of 1844, Putting Away Sin. We feel sensible of our many imperfections. While we have contended for what we believe to be truth, we can see that pride of opinion and self have arisen. When new truths have been presented, we have been slow to receive them. We have been asleep during the tarrying of the vision, and we have not labored with that ardor we should have done, had we so fully realized the nearness of the judgment. We have been slow of heart to believe all that Moses and the prophets have spoken, and all our labors and toils appear to us as nothing, and that at best we have been but unprofitable servants. We can therefore only offer the prayer of the publican, God be merciful to us sinners. We feel that we are now making our last appeal, that we are addressing you through these columns for the last time. In this crisis we must stand alone. If any are hanging upon our skirts, we shake them off. Your blood be upon your own heads. We ask forgiveness of God and all men, for everything which may have been inconsistent with His honor and glory, and we desire to lay ourselves upon His altar. Here we allay our friends and worldly interests, and trust alone in the merits of Christ's atoning blood, through the efficacious and sanctifying influence of God's Holy Spirit, for pardon and forgiveness and acceptance at the Father's mercy seat. May the blessing of God rest upon all of us, and that we may all meet in God's everlasting kingdom, is the prayer of your unworthy servant, J. V. Himes. The above was written in Boston, with the expectation that this would be the last paper. I heartily join in the prayer and confession expressed by Brother H. N. Southard, editor of the Midnight Cry, Saturday, October 12, 1844, Volume 7, Number 16, p. 128. Advent, Second Movement of 1844. When the time passed, my own conviction still is, the Lord is at the door. For the event of His coming I, through grace, shall quietly and patiently wait. But I must add, that I have now no confidence in any definite point of time in the future. I shall, through grace, endeavor to watch and keep my garments, believing that the Lord will now come as a thief. George Storrs, in the Midnight Cry, October 31, 1844, Volume 7, Number 18, p. 138. We have been mistaken in a belief to which we thought ourselves conducted by the word and spirit and providence of God. But the word stands sure, however we may err, and the promise is true, if any man will do his will, he shall know of the doctrine, whether it be of God. The Lord will lead his obedient children. We have an unwavering trust that he will cause our disappointment and trial to work together for our good. We shall humbly watch the providences of God, and we know he will vindicate his truth and faithfulness. Let him be honored, though we may be humbled. Id. Editorial, p. 140. As many of our brethren and sisters have disposed of their substance, and given alms, agreeable to Luke 12:33, in the confident expectation of the speedy coming of the Lord, I wish to have immediate provision made for the comfort and wants of all such persons, and families, by the Advent Brethren, J. V. Times, in the Midnight Cry, October 31, 1844.